Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gregory Ball, and I am the host of Good Trouble. It's a little conversation that we have with good troublemakers of the highest order. And today, we have a person who I've known for many, many years. I'm aware of most of the good trouble that he's gotten into, and we're fortunate to be graced with the presence of the president and CEO, my boss, the president and CEO of Embrace Boston, Dr. Imari Paris Jeffries. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
What's going on? And you're not quitting this job either. You've been trying to get out of good trouble since its inception. So
So people
it's
don't know
official.
this. People don't know this, but I've been trying to fire myself from good trouble. So let me give you a little backstory before we get into Dr. Paris Jeffries' story today. When we originally came up with the idea for Good Trouble, the idea was that I was going to produce it and that Dr. Paris Jeffries was going to be the host. But somewhere in there, I got flim flammed. I got led astray, run amok, and then I ended up being the host. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll host it for a couple of episodes until we can get things set up. And then next thing you know, here I am, 30 something episodes later, and a partnership with NBC that we're super grateful for. And now we have a really cool set courtesy of that partnership, which I'm excited about. And all the cool accoutrement.
Comfy chairs,
You know what I'm
full time hosting duty, man. That's you now. That's
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Well, listen, the only reason I'm keeping this job is because of Michelle. Michelle is all right with me, and she's been making this work pretty smooth. And that's the good part about this job. And the other good part about this job is that it's connected to Embrace Boston, which is the organization that you have been shepherding for how many years now?
Ooh, it feels like dog years because I started a week before the pandemic. So almost 5 years on paper, but feels like a decade, right? I I've totally lost track of days, man. But since 2020,
So
I joined the team.
let's talk about that, because I think one of the reasons I was super excited about having you on the show, and is not he didn't force me to have him on the show. I actually invited him on the show. One of the reasons that I was excited about having you on the show is because I feel like, um, as much as there has been attention to Embrace, as much as there has been a lot of stories about us, and um, we have been seen in a lot of incredible spaces that we're super grateful to be in. I think that there's not the full information about the story of how Embrace came to be, and kind of the true Hollywood story about how we made it from you know two employees basically to now a team of what, about 15, I
But
think.
seven. We just hired our
17.
17th person.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so take me back to the beginning. How did you end up being at Embrace?
Yeah, I'll get in that story, but I think Embrace really started in those plastic seats at Bob the Chef's. You and I, 20, 30, almost 30 years ago, it started sneaking in the Afrocentrics.
Mm-hmm.
When we wanted to be wannabe poets during the Love Jones
Era. Yes.
era, sharing an apartment in the South End of all places, eating at South End House of Pizza. They had the wingdings, like
Yep.
5 for 12 wingdings and a can of soda.
So basically,
That
ladies and gentlemen, he's telling you we was broke as hell. We,
it,
we
it,
had two nickels to rub them together. He had a nickel, and I had a
and,
nickel.
and one of my favorite restaurants now is in the South End, Mita.
Mm-hmm.
Doug Williams, who owns that, and there's a few of those, and that's where there used to be a package store, and
Mm-hmm.
we used to go over there, and when we were allowed to drink adult beverages, and so like a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
things that we're talking about and doing now at Embrace started from conversations we had almost 30 years ago. Just thinking about the vibrancy of the city, thinking about community building, placemaking, and we weren't using those words back then. We were just living, trying to be in places,
Mm-hmm.
going to spots, being in different neighborhoods,
Yeah, I
going to.
don't think we even had the language to kind of articulate it that way, but that was kind of the drive and the goal, because we knew it was kind of almost like we knew that was what needed to be done,
Yes.
but we if you had asked me to give you the academic version of how to articulate that, we would not have been able to do so.
And we were trying to do it, on a low budget with little gatherings at our places. And, people don't know that, you and I have been roommates on two different occasions, once in Mission Hill and once in the South End. And so, the things that we tried to do in the places that we occupied, the place that we occupied as roommates in Mission Hill, there were 4 or 5 of those apartments that were occupied by friends of ours. And it became a de facto, we called it the dorm. And
yeah, we all lived in the same apartment building.
It was like broke Melrose Place.
Yes, it was a very broke and black Melrose Place. So we were in one apartment. Was it Wood and
Pat
and Pat were in one apartment, Saki, and then Rico was in one apartment, and then Saki was downstairs. Rico and Ibby were in one apartment, and Saki was downstairs.
Yeah, so I think all these like small building blocks of community making, being in places, trying to host gatherings, being at places, manifested it in itself. And a lot of our closest friends, people that we care about now, and in some cases work with, we met back in those days. And so this is 30 years of relationships culminating in this moment. And so when they hired me to join at the time King Boston to build the monument. A few weeks later, or a couple weeks, actually the week later, the pandemic happened, and during that summer, George Floyd was murdered. And I remember when that popped into my social media, I actually didn't believe it was true because it just seemed
it looked so unreal that it didn't feel like it could be true.
I thought it must have been like a throwaway scene in a movie, right? Because it just didn't seem real. And then I think once it became evident to everybody that was real, there was this sense of outrage, I think, at least in my lifetime, I had never seen. And so even though we were, supposed to be sheltering in place and staying away from each other, it was so important. It was like the summer of protest that continued on throughout the year. We were wiping down groceries. And so at the time, this opportunity to build a monument to honor Dr. and Mrs. King became secondary to supporting real challenges. And so Embrace ended up raising money, but giving away money. We've given away, $2.7 million of our resources that we were using to build this monument because people needed to eat and survive and live, and access to healthcare and mutual aid, and being supported in protest, and supporting small businesses. And so we ended up giving away our money and hosting convenings, right? And so I remember that same year, I had begged you, to start, right? Because I think you said, "Oh, I'm going to start in January and start the fresh year." And I was like, "Nah, I actually need you to start now, today."
Like I actually need you last week.
Yeah, next week we got these things, and we're trying to do like some gatherings, and people are asking us to come together. I need you to start next week, and you did. In a small capacity until you could transition from where you were working before. And we were doing everything, man. Obviously we were working towards building the monument, but we were hosting people, gatherings, coalitions, creating space for people to come and talk and share their fears. And that's where our model started. We realized honestly, from those experiences where we cut our teeth at Afrocentrics or in college parties or Bob the Chefs or New York Pizza, and those places we were going, and house parties we were hosting in Mission Hill in the South End, we had the power to convene people. And so we were placemaking. And so I think the thing that I knew and you knew that we should do, that we were halfway decent at, was
bring people together
and hold space.
Yeah. So, but talk about that pandemic piece, because I think it gets lost on people, the difficulty of what confronted you at that time. You're a brand new leader stepping into this role. What were the expectations that you had at the time, or that you were given at the time, about what you were required to do as the leader of King Boston at the time? And then the world turns upside down and you're sheltered in place.
Yeah, there, yeah, I don't know if folks remember there was an article that came out in the Globe around like, is Boston actually going to do this thing or not around building the monument? And this was before
Hmm.
the pandemic, because it had started in 2017 and people felt like it was not getting the momentum and the fundraising and all the other things that it needed to get. Those things weren't happening, and Boston had this long history. I mean, we are one of America's historic cities. There's monuments everywhere. There's a square named after everyone. But
Hmm.
for a city like ours, where Dr. and Mrs. King came and met and fell in love, and their love story began, there was nothing to commemorate them in a robust way. Right? There are plaques and small markers that they were here, but nothing to commemorate their significance to the world and Boston's role in that significance. And so the opportunity to build this monument was happening, and we were trying to gain momentum. And one of the charges I was given was, can you try to raise $3 million in the first year that you're here? A week later, the pandemic happened, and as a human being, I'm just, I'm worried, right? And we were like, we're running out of Clorox wipes and hand sanitizers, and people were wondering if there's going to be water, and it was this airborne. Was it,
Hmm.
how do you get COVID? And I mean, we were scared. We were scared. I was
Hmm.
scared. I was scared, and but I felt like we had to do something. We had to
Hmm.
do something, and a little bit through default, right? And so had a bag full of this power of convening. Um, we had this positionality. We were named after Dr. King, the King family, for Pete's sake, and people were looking at us and saying, well, like, are y'all going to do something? Are y'all going to organize something? And we had a couple bucks in the bank. And so we started giving it away. We started trying to support other nonprofits doing mutual aid. And I think simultaneously, and most people know, I was doing my PhD at the time. And so my research was about socialization and how objects, how rituals socialize people into white supremacy thinking, how objects and rituals socialize people into behavior, how objects and rituals reify the way that people think about themselves and the world. And
Hmm.
so a monument is just that. It's a socialization tool. It's
Will you? So sorry to cut you off, but you always call it what you say is like an analog cookie, like the cookie on your computer. It's like that in real life.
Yeah, that's right, right. And so like, people know that when you are online and you accept the cookies on the website, close down the window of the site, the cookies, because you accepted it, is still reading things and it's feeding you information based on your searching browser, right? And so
Hmm.
monuments do the same thing, right? They are analog cookies. And so you might leave the monument, you might not be in the presence of the monument, but it still is telling you something. It is telling you about who the city values, who the people who raised the money, what their values were, right? And there's a correlation between Confederate monuments, 710 of those that are still standing in this country, and the states that ban women's reproductive rights, ban books, have laws that discriminate people who are queer or different in schools, right? And so they're doing exactly what they're told, right? And most of these
Hmm.
monuments were erected between 1910 and 1930, especially after black veterans returned from the world wars, right? And so it was a way where these empowered black veterans were coming back, and they were like, hold your horses, let's put these markers down. The other wave of Confederate monuments came up during the civil rights movement, right? And so there's these times when these monuments are erected uh, during these moments where black power, black opportunity arrives, and so they exist to tell the story. And so many of the Confederate schools, many of the schools that black people attend, especially down south, are named after Confederate leaders, right? And so it's, although you're advancing with education, there's always a thumb on your temple. There's always a knee on your neck, metaphorically, while you're in this learning environment. Especially if you're a young person, you go to Robert E. Lee Junior High School or Jefferson Davis Elementary School. What is that
Hmm.
saying to you, right? It's subconscious. It's subliminal. You're the Jefferson Davis rebels. We were just talking earlier with Dart Adams about college and high school jerseys and paraphernalia. Imagine being the Jefferson Davis rebels as your
Hmm.
high school mascot, right? In a predominantly black school in Alabama or Mississippi or Arkansas or Tennessee. Like
Yeah,
what is that?
what is the story that tells you every day when you go to school?
Yes.
And then I think that people, I think I think it's undervalued in people's mind what those stories are, because I think that, you know, a lot of what we're doing here in terms of Embrace Boston is narrative work. That's one of the reasons why we have a podcast. Is like, trust me, we live in a world where everybody's got a podcast, but for us, it was actually connected to what we do.
Yes.
Just because the world did not necessarily need another podcast, but I feel like it needs this one. But telling that stories, and the importance of that storytelling is what it reinforces. That storytelling, what that storytelling does is reinforce those stories in you every day of who you are, what's important in the world that you're around.
And it's subconscious, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I tell people this story, and people know, and it wasn't always this way. I don't eat meat.
Mm-hmm.
But think about us as meat eaters, right? We all intellectually know we don't need to eat meat for protein. In 2024, there's alternative forms of protein. It's known, right? We know that factory farms, particularly farms that raise cows, harm the environment. We know that the gases that cows, you know, basically
Mm-hmm.
farting hurts the environment. We know this. We know that mammals don't produce milk unless their bodies are manipulated. We know this, right? And so as soon as children, especially in our country, get teeth, they get solid food, and that solid food is usually some chicken or some sort of meat, because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise children get mother's milk or they get pureed vegetables. So as soon as we get teeth, we're given food, right? Solid food, meat. You know, there are rituals like, you know, what do you do on you know, 4th of July? You go
Barbecue,
barbecue. What do you do on Thanksgiving?
turkey.
What do you do on Christmas?
Well, depends. If you Puerto Rican, you got one thing. If you Dominican, you got Puerto Rican,
Yeah,
Dominican, you got
right.
another thing. You over Jamaica, Jamaicans, you got some oxtails. At my house, we had lasagna and collard greens, not together.
Season with some ham in there,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Always have some ham in there, ham hocks.
And so it's like, you know, meat eating is part of our culture because we've been socialized into it, right? You
Mm-hmm.
had no choice. You had no choice to decide if you did not want to eat meat because you were given it to as a baby, and then it's reified through rituals, and then it becomes so part of our culture that it's so normed that you don't even notice. And so
Mm-hmm.
now sometimes when you try not to eat meat, people are like, what, something wrong with you? You know, you ain't eat meat.
Are you sick?
You sick, right? And then it's, you know, even in small customs, right? You get some coffee that you want cream and sugar, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want some milk in your coffee, right? So it is so ordinary that it's hard to do something different from what's ordinary, right? Because even that process of meeting it is part of narrative, and that's the way that racism works. It's so ordinary that it's hard to even remember when you were not racialized because it's so embedded into our systems, our rituals. And this is what people talk about systemic racism. It's so ordinary you can't even remember what when it wasn't happening. And so this narrative is an important part of our culture, right? If you take someone who, you know, grew up in Mongolia and they come here and all of a sudden they go to a drugstore and in February there's hearts and chocolate candies, they won't know what that is. But most folks who live in the States know what, you know, hearts and chocolate candies and drugstores mean in February, right? They know it's
Mm-hmm.
Valentine's Day. And so these embedded knowledge, these things that we inherently know have been socialized into us. And that's the way that racism works. That's the way that monuments work. That's the way that built environment works. We're so used to and accustomed to things that we have muscle memory into these structures. And so Embrace understands that. And that's why podcasts like Good Trouble and our monument work is a part of that. How do we tell different stories, use different languages, build different structures to promote different ways of being that works in the subconscious?
Well, but you know, we're talking about the history of Embrace and kind of talking about that. We were talking about that line of how the organization has grown. It started off with just the idea of creating a monument, and that kind of was going to wrap it up, and everybody goes home, and that was it. I know that, you know, Paul English had come back from a trip. I want to say it's San Francisco.
That's right.
He had come back from San Francisco and saw that there was a monument to Dr. King there, and was wondering why there wasn't one in Boston. And when he got here, he just started to reach out to the people within this space, and it started off with Reverend Walker and Reverend Brown.
Yes, and Damon and Dr. Kia Martin were our five founders. And honestly, the pandemic changed everything. The pandemic changed everything, and so the conversation we just were just diving into around narrative, was a part of what people wanted to know and understand more and interrogate, right? People were not, remember, people were knocking down monuments during the summer of 2021,
Mm-hmm.
right? We were saying, why is there still Confederate monuments still in these public places, prominent places? And so monuments were a part of the mix. They were part of the conversation of racial equity in 2020 and 2021. And here we were, an organization building a new monument honoring black love to black people in the middle of America's oldest public park. So, but that within itself was controversial to a lot of people. What are they doing up in Boston, doing this? Especially this narrative that there's no thriving,
There's
essential
no
black
black people
community.
in Boston.
And so the fact that we were doing it, right? The fact that we were placing the monument steps from one of America's oldest black neighborhoods, Beacon Hill. Many people don't know that the backside of Beacon Hill is one of America's oldest black neighborhoods. And it was important. And since we were doing it, we said, hey, there's other leaders besides the Kings who are Boston based, Boston bred, Boston folks who also did the work, who were also leading the way, not only in our city, but in the country. And so we memorialized 70 other people on the 1965 Freedom Rally Plaza. And so every time we could think about memorializing someone, we said, who else? Who else? And who's missing? And we tried to do that with this.
So when, like I said, I'm just amazed, and because most people don't know this. You started, the pandemic hits, and it's literally you and one other person.
And then and you were number three, right? And then it was
Yeah,
like three
three,
of us
four.
and four of us. And so a lot of the things that we were doing to activate, it was like you, me, a couple other people, some shoestrings and some toothpicks, like throwing up glitter from behind us, like woo, like look how exciting this is, like clap tracks or whatever we was doing. We were just making stuff up because and people needed something. They needed someone who, in an organization, who said it was okay for them to be afraid, who could help when they could, and provide some semblance of hope and embrace. Tried to do that. We tried our best to do that during that time, and I think we're still trying to do that.
Yeah, and then we get to the unveiling, which was a monumental weekend, and it was something that I'll never forget. And I don't think we'll all ever forget it. And then it goes out into the world, and I remember that as a particularly tense time for us in the aftermath of the unveiling. And there were a lot of difficulties in getting the monument made. What was the biggest struggle that you felt as a leader that you confronted in the creation of the monument?
Yeah, man, that was like that day was I think one of our best days, and also like an extremely difficult day.
Mm-hmm.
And folks remember, I got up there and I had this speech planned, and I had my new blue suit on, and I got up there and started crying. And I remember walking up there, I was like talking. Some people say you got an inner voice or you don't. I don't normally have an inner voice, but somebody was talking to me, and it's like, don't go up there and cry in front of these cameras and stuff. And I ended up crying like a baby, but it was filled with emotion, man. Like we have heard probably at least 1,500 King stories over the course of 4 years, or leading up to the building of the monument. People's family stories. We honored 70 folks, and some of us, and you remember that, they were coming up to us because their families, their parents never got acknowledged, never got recognized, and here we were. We had the audacity to recognize people who were invisible, and thinking about this invisibility, the monument originally was going to recognize only Dr. King, and so Mrs. King was invisible. She was a hidden figure, and we said, no, she's not. Like she was monumental to the movement, and you and I were not. We were not born in 1968, and so our listening, our hearing, our understanding of Dr. King was through Mrs. King. She was actually someone we heard in real life. Dr. King, we saw him in grainy films and pictures.
She's the one who carried the legacy.
She's the one who carried the legacy. And so we had these families who we were honoring, who felt like we were carrying the legacy for their families. And then, that year, both of my parents passed away. And so, as a child of parents, right? You want your parents to be proud of you, and like, man, if there was ever a moment that you wanted your parents to be proud of you, like that would have been the moment. And I was sitting up there and just thinking like this would have been a moment for my parents to be proud of me. And they both passed away. And I think the long term impacts of COVID got them. And so it was carrying the emotions of those 1,500 King stories, those 70 honorees, my folks, expectations that people had for us, for you and I and our team around what this meant for the city. It became a symbol of hope. And, all of a sudden I saw those faces, and I remember looking at Governor Patrick, and I remember when he was running for governor, and I heard him on the radio for the first time, and I was like, whoa. And I was standing up there looking at him and looking at Congresswoman Presley, and like the two of them were looking at me, and I don't know, man, it was a lot. It was a lot. And then I heard myself, the blood was coming back to my face, and I got myself together, and it was a wonderful day. It was a wonderful day. But I think the other point that you're making, I think after we unveiled the Embrace and the following weekend, it was like this sea of.
It wasn't even the weekend. It was the day after.
Yeah,
or the day of.
The day of this backlash. And so, I remember on, the day after the unveiling, the gala, I was on national news. It was the first time I was ever on national live news, talking, and in some cases, case making for the monument and why we chose that monument to represent the Kings. And
I think there's so many pieces of misinformation and pieces that people don't know. Like, number one, they don't know of the process in which we chose the piece. They don't know the history of somebody like Hank. They don't know, some people didn't even know why it was Mrs. King and Dr. King. I feel like there was so much misinformation. And in the backlash, it actually, in many ways, let me know the importance and necessity of the work that we're doing. Because I felt like a lot of that backlash was fueled by misinformation.
Yes.
It was fueled by misinformation, and it's also fueled by this the bias around Boston and the narrative of who people think we are.
Yes. And so, right, 4 of our 5 founders are Black, and of the submissions, there were 5 finalists. All but one were Black teams, and it was a community vote, and we had voting stations across the city, churches, post office, libraries, and we had a jury that were made up of King experts, artists, etc. And so the organization itself didn't choose. We didn't handpick anything. The city of Boston and its residents chose the Embrace.
And the call, and people don't even know the original call. The original RFP was for an abstract piece. You know what I mean? It was actually designed, so it was never ever going to be a actual full statue of in the classic sense. This is, and in fact, I think if I remember correctly, of the 5 final submissions, this is the only one that had an actual physical depiction of the Kings in any way.
Yes,
because it was a bridge, there was a pond,
it was a water feature.
Yeah,
it was one called the pulpit, which were
yes,
which
I
was
remember that.
It looked like a pulpit, and they were all abstract pieces, and And we think about the Embrace in relationship to the Shaw Memorial. At least we do at Embrace, right? Up until after the Civil War, there were no depictions of Black people in monuments, right? And so there are these motifs that live in American monuments. And so the image of a Black person in American monuments prior to the Civil War were of the crouching subservient. And so when you think about the Emancipation Monument, you have the Lincoln standing there, and then you have the Black person half nude crouching in front of Lincoln. That's an example of the crouching subservient motif. If you go to the public garden, there's a monument called the Founders Monument. It's right on the wall of Beacon Street. And so you have the founders, John Winthrop, and the Pilgrims with their pilgrim regalia, with indigenous people draped on the side. In what position? The crouching subservient. And so this idea of these motifs that live in monument and public art, I mean, no one's sitting on the corner talking, yeah, what's the new motif in public? No one's talking about this, right? That's not
Depends on which corner.
Yeah, which corner. Yeah, no one's talking about these motifs in monuments, right? The other motif that's evident in a lot of American monuments is the Western equestrian tradition. And so there's an awful lot in every...
And AKA white guy on a horse.
In every state. And so just in proximity of the Embrace, you have the Hooker statue right there. In front of the State House, you have the George Washington statue in front of the State House. There's at least 5 Western equestrian. You have the Shaw Memorial. You have Shaw on a horse. And so the Western equestrian tradition is a part of also a motif in monuments. And so the Embrace is a part of a new American motif in monuments, right? And so it's a move away from idol worship monuments, because most American monuments are in this neoclassical style. They're always high. They're always sitting on a horse. Also, I mean, when you're on a horse, you're just higher, right? And so it's an embodied experience where you cannot touch monuments. You have to look up at them, and they're designed in a way that make them look old and ancient. And so this neoclassical Greek revival, Roman revival style, which tricks the mind. Again, they're marketing tools. They're billboards disguised as historic figures. If something is old and you can't touch it and you only have to look at it, it must mean it's significant. And so if it's old, significant, and you have to look up, anything I have to look up to means that it's more powerful than me, right? And so this is this mind trickery. This is psychological tools that monuments do, right? The Western equestrian tradition, or the crouching subservient, right? And so these were the psychological warfare narratives of monuments. And so what is a monument that is big, right? It's 2 stories high, but you can touch it. What's a monument that represents humanity? It's a hug, but it's not an idol worship, right? Those are your arms. Those are my arms. And so it's a different concept in monuments where most and a lot of artists are moving into, and this is a lot to explain to people who just see something and say, what in the world is that?
But I think also as people, given, like you said, the history of people having certain monuments burned into their brain,
yes,
and this is the idea of what a monument is supposed to be. When they see something that's outside of that, is automatically, what's wrong with it. And then also, I will say that. And I this is why I afford people a level of grace when it comes to any criticism of the monument. One, I think any art can be criticized. Like,
yes, that's right.
It's up to interpretation of who you are and what your interaction with it is. But I also understand where, as Black people in America, where many times we're used to there being an ulterior motive. It's almost a trauma response in some ways, like, oh, see, when it's time to do the monument to the Black man, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I could very well understand that, but
Same.
it was, for me, it was like that was not the case at all with this. It actually, all the things that you say you would want to be a part of the process to create something like this is exactly what happened. So, but because it happened here, and because the city has a level of a reputation, then there was a rumor that the city of Boston paid the money for it, and all this other,
right,
just pure misinformation. What is the wildest thing that you heard, if you can remember, the wildest thing that you heard in the aftermath of the unveiling?
I mean, one of the funniest ones was, I kind of agree, and I could show, when we go out there, I could show people where it looked like, if people know the movie Baby Boy, where Ving Rhames puts Tyrese in a headlock.
That was funny.
It kind of looks like that. I was like, it looked exactly like that. That was pretty funny. That was actually hilarious. But I think a lot of the things that you said were some of the comments that we
Mm,
had heard, and then you remember a week or two later, uh, the murder of the black police officer of Tyree Nichols in
mm-hmm,
Memphis, Tennessee, occurred just a couple weeks after we unveiled the monument. And so, thinking about Memphis, this place where Dr. King was assassinated, where some of the grandfathers of these police officers who were all black were marching with "I am a man" sign, right, for the
mm-hmm,
sanitation workers' rights, then perpetuating this inhumanity of another human being who's black.
mm-hmm.
And the monument became a place, as it has become in our city. It's become an open sanctuary for memory and contemplation for people. And so it was exactly what it was intended to be, both as a tourist attraction to commemorate the love and the work of the 70 leaders honored there and the kings, but also a place for all of us for public memory, public commemoration of events. We've seen protest rallies begin there. We've
Mm-hmm.
seen there was a procession. The young woman who was a black ballerina who passed away recently. There was a memorial service for her last Sunday after the Maso con Salsa festival at the Embrace, and so it's become a um, open air sanctuary for all people to use and experience.
When you see it being used that way, what does that make you personally feel like? Because I know that you've given a lot of energy and time and effort, and like you work incredibly hard. And I'm not just saying this because I want to raise. Um, you work incredibly hard to get the embrace message out there. And when you see it being used that way, when you see it being a gathering spot, when you see, I remember there's been a variety of different times when you see people kind of using it as that public place to gather. How does that make you feel personally?
Man, I just feel honored that I got to be a part of it and to be able to do it with, one of my oldest, longest, closest friends, right? Like who gets to build monuments? And who could have imagined like two dudes like us who like sometimes barely had enough money to like get a dollar slice of pizza. Like, I mean, thank God they were big and we would split them, right? That's why it was a treat to get those
With the
those
20 wings,
20 wings, because it's like we could get all 20. Like, let's get two
we
packs.
we eat.
We get right. It's some wings and a soda, right? Just two dudes like us to get to to get to be a part of this, man. I'm like, and to like be able to share with our communities in like our city community, but our
Mm.
personal community. And man, I feel humbled and fortunate and grateful. Like, I feel grateful. This, I don't know. I just never in my lifetime would have thought I could build or be a part of building something that was going to last for generations. So, mostly humbled, lots of gratefulness. Feels like a privilege. Feels like a privilege to be a part of this.
So, the monument is done, but the work continues on, and you know, I know there are people who kind of thought that okay, after the monument embrace would kind of stop, but talk about the continuation of that mission of being able to kind of be an actor within the community. What was the thinking beyond the monument for you, and talk about some of the how the organization is still showing up in the creation of continuing to create monuments.
Yeah, man. Like a call to action. If the United Daughters of the Confederacy could build 430, 400 and 400, I'm saying like five times, I'm remixing it, 430 monuments in 20 years, can we build 50 in 10? And so, we've got one down. We're working on another one with a group of people in Western Mass. And so I think we can. I think we can build 50 and 10. We know what these monuments do when they're around, how they change the way that people see themselves, how they tell stories, even though they're not moving, how these motifs imprint in our mind, how they train us, how they provide hope, how they provide sadness and tragedy and promote poverty and racism. And so there's more monuments for us to build, not only in Massachusetts and Boston, but throughout the country. And so, this first one outside of Boston in Great Barrington with a group of leaders out there will be our second major physical monument. But we got a couple projects, maybe about 7 projects that we're working on actively in the city that, by 2030, which is Boston's 400th anniversary of a city, we hope to see some of these monuments up. We hope to have at least 4 or 5 of them up by 2030.
Yeah, so and the work doesn't just stop with those actual monuments. There's the other place we talk about, the placemaking piece of it. Talk to us about the importance of, we just passed Embrace Muscle Consalsa, the first edition of it, which I was super excited. I was more excited for Mr. Masso than anything else, because I felt like the day was a live edition of his show, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
If you listen to his show,
Yes.
it felt like it was a live edition of an episode of Maso Consalsa. It was the spoken word that he will play. It'll be the variety of music. It's never just one genre of music, even though a lot of it is salsa and jazz infused. There's pieces of that, but he'll have R&B music in there. It's like it's that wide range. Then it just felt like a reunion at the same time as being a activation at the same time. So talk to us about those pieces, as well as along with the Embrace Ideas Festival.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it by some counts, we had about 5,000 people throughout the day, which was huge for our first one. But what also heartens me is that there was something going on down the street. In Dewey Square, there was
The One Day Only Festival.
the One Day Only Festival.
That's the folks from over at Kickback Boston.
In Kickback Boston, there was it was Mexican New Year's celebrations in East Boston, and there was some things going on in JP and in Dorchester. And so our city is a big city. We could host multiple things simultaneously, and they all
Be vibrant.
And so this misconception that we can't do all these things at once is like nuts. And I'm so proud of like the generation of folks trying to do something, and Embrace is just in the ecosystem of people doing stuff, right? Like, in some cases we've innovated, but we're in an ecosystem of really a bunch of creative people making things happen simultaneously. And so it's like a wonderful time for us to be active in this. And so that made me feel good that we could be in this ecosystem thriving and have all these things happening at the same time, like major cities are able to do, and support each other. And had ours ended at 7 and we stayed a little longer, had it ended at 7 on time, we probably would have walked and supported the other groups too, right? Because there's enough love to go around. But I think one of the things that we learned in building a monument, it's like stone soup. Embrace has a pot and some water. And so when you have a pot and some water and you invite people to put their ingredients, you end up with something more than a pot and water. You end up with some, something hearty and nutritious. And, in this event of building a monument, you create community. And so we are continuing to create community beyond the monument with our activations. And every time we do a new monument, you have to go through the same process. Who's not invited to the table? Whose opinion hadn't been heard? Whose story hadn't been told? How do we tell their story? What else can we add? 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 Until you just can't add anymore. The pot's over full. And so, that's what we do every time we try to build something. Every time we try to build a monument, that's what we try to do. Every time we have a activation, and I know it kills us, and it's like, we can't do one more thing. We can't add one, and then we end up adding one more thing. And so there probably is some limits,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there are some limits.
We're only
slow down.
Yeah, we're only 17 people. And I think people think that Embrace is like 50 or 100. I mean, and we just got 17, right? We
Yeah.
just got
I
17
used I
people.
used to tease Real P all the time because I was like, yo, how he because Real P's group was the Famous Nobodies, and they seemed like they were everywhere when they first came out. When they first put their first record out, and when they put out Jimmy Choo's and all those records, it was Dutch, it was Chris Brook, it was all of them, and it seemed like they were everywhere. And I was like, how many of there are y'all? And he would be like, we're everywhere, and and it was really like five. But it felt like it was this humongous movement, and in a way, it really feels like that with Embrace because people really think we've got an entire floor of an office building downtown.
Right.
There's about 150 employees of
Hmm.
varying degrees, and it really has never been that
No.
since, at least not since I've been. I don't know if there's another 150 people, I have not met them.
Whether is else on the shelf working or something. Yeah.
Somebody.
I think because Embrace is everybody, right? Everybody is Embrace. It's everywhere. And we're just talking about, off air about our brand. Like, how do we make a brand that everyone feels like it's their brand without going pop, right? Without
Mm-hmm.
being corny. And there's a line, right? It's a line. And I think what I love about working with you is that you've always been the person that reminds us of where the line is. And so, you try to create something that's accessible to everybody, but also understand that there's a line that once you do that too much, then it becomes, not special. And it needs to be special to people, right? And so we are trying to thread that needle where we're trying to make it accessible but special at the same time.
So as we're looking forward, we had our first successful Embrace Muscle Consasa. We have the Embrace Ideas Festival that's coming up this year, and then we have the Friends and Family coming up in January with the Sneaker Ball, Sneaker Gala, which we strangely enough we not to you know toot our own horn, but it was interesting to see that we got best gala for that in Boston Magazine because it wasn't necessarily a situation where we were doing it for an accolade. We're doing it for people to kind of just truly connect and enjoy themselves with one another. And like I knew it was. Listen. So I've been to a million parties in my life, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if you've caught this from your interactions with me, but I've been outside. That said, I knew it was a special party when Dart Adams of all people put on a collared shirt and actually came to the affair. And I want you to understand this is a
and, and,
man,
and we got pictures
and
too.
we have pictures of him
Proof.
and we have proof that one, he was outside, two, he was in a nightclub, and he actually had, I want to say, he actually had on shoes and not sneakers that
It
night.
was like that
It might have been,
that
it might
Iron
have been
Man
that
thing, right?
crazy.
Proof that Dart Adams was outside with a shirt on. It's
Yes.
like a picture, like almost like a sighting. Like,
Pretty
but
much, because like there's certain things that you just don't think you're gonna
mm-mm,
see. You
mm-mm.
don't think like I don't want to ever see another Lakers championship, and I didn't think I was gonna ever see Dart Adams
No,
actually
yeah,
at a fundraiser for a nonprofit. I didn't think that was going to happen.
and again, it goes back to the beginning of this conversation. At
Mm-hmm.
least in my mind, like this was like 20-year-old Greg and Imari, at Bob the Chef in those plastic chairs or splitting wings. Like, man, if we could ever throw something like what people would go to, like, we wear suits and stuff. Like that would
Mm-hmm.
probably have been me talking about we wear this, and you're like, nah, man,
You gotta be comfortable.
we gotta be comfortable and gotta have some kicks on and
So,
stuff.
so,
And
so,
it's
so
like,
talk, so,
we like,
let's talk about that for a quick second, because I think
because
that
I was always the suit dude. And
yes,
you was like,
exactly.
you got
Like
the
if you,
kicks.
so people don't understand the genesis of the sneakers. So let's explain that for a second. The thought process behind the sneakers was going into the unveiling. We knew that this was a celebratory moment,
Yes.
and it was super important for us to actually have a good time. We, having been in this space, and Imari's been in it, in the nonprofit world in the helping sector for way longer than I have. And one of the things that I noticed very quickly is that there's a lot of rubber chicken dinners and a whole bunch of people laughing at jokes that ain't funny. And I didn't want to be a part of that, and I didn't want to convene that. I didn't want to
Yeah.
be be funneling and be a part of that. So, and plus, if I'm going to be there and I've got to be a part of it, I want to have a good time and I want people to truly have fun. That is the relation. And then it wasn't just about having a good time, but it was also finding that joy with other people in community.
That's
The
right.
beautiful part about the initial, um, uh, the initial ball and the most recent one is that there are people in that room that I don't think would ever be in the same room together. They just wouldn't. There's no there's no other event of that caliber that Dart is going to be at and the same time as Senator Markey. Like it's just not.
Wearing his custom Celtics dunks.
Yes, it's just not going to happen. So if we can create that space where those people will interact and connect, I feel like when you take in art is the opportunity for you to see and really recognize the humanity in other people. Because if you like the song and I like the song and we're enjoying it together, then that kind of tells me something about you. And now there's the beginning of that bridge in the conversations. Like I say all the time, most of my deepest relationships were connections that were crafted through the mutual love of art.
Yeah, and the artwork around the MLK sneaker gala, friends and family, is Dr. and Mrs. King dancing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so
Which you don't ever see
you
him smiling broadly and dancing and
dancing
joyful with his
with
wife
his wife,
and just looking like a man in love.
a human being,
Yes.
right? A human being. And so, even in this idea of honoring individuals, we tend to idol worship and turn them into robots. Right,
Mm-hmm.
he is some sort of civil rights robot that said that I have a dream speech and kind of said the inspirational thing. He wasn't a full human being
Mm-hmm.
that loved, had children,
Made
made
mistakes.
mistakes, was sad, was like
Mm-hmm.
joyous, but all the things that human beings, right? The whole gambit of
All the challenges we all
that's
face.
right. And so we wanted to celebrate him as a human being, and it's his birthday. And like, there's a lot of times I want to do things on my birthday. I don't think I want to do. I probably don't want to do the inspirational
Mm-hmm.
civil rights speech on my birthday. I probably want to have a good time with people I love
Mm-hmm.
and care about. And so it was important for us to also illuminate the full king during our event and that weekend. And so the MLK weekend has become you start your weekend by going to the MLK Embrace Honors. Then you go to the MLK Breakfast, which is the longest running MLK commemoration ceremony in the country, the local Boston MLK Breakfast. And then you end in that weekend with the Boston Children's Chorus MLK concert. And so
Mm-hmm.
that is what you should do, or some of the things we would recommend you do for that weekend to celebrate and honor the King legacy.
And I mean, and that's the key part of it, isn't it? It's those places and creating those spaces where people can connect and interact. Because listen, I saw a couple of y'all at the parties, and rhythm is not your friend, but that's okay. We are. You know what I mean? You are more than you are more than allowed to come out with your two left feet. I only got three dance moves myself, so don't feel bad.
Yeah, I only got three too, and sometimes they're in the wrong sequence. So
Exactly, exactly. All three of them.
yeah, all
So,
three. Yeah, looking like Charlie Brown dancing on the you know,
oh
yeah.
god, that's
So
horrible. I'm not that bad, but yes, I understand what you're saying. So let's talk about the future. Let's wrap up and talk about the future. What do you see as the future of Embrace, and what do you see as the things that are coming on that people should be aware of and looking out for?
yeah, we made three commitments when before I came along. There were three
Mm-hmm.
things that we said we would do. We would build the monument, which we have done. We would make sure that we were in support of supporting the church, the home church of Dr. King, which was 12th Baptist Church. So we raised and gave away $1 million to 12th Baptist Church. And the last thing that we said we were going to do is build a center in Roxbury. It's important that the center is in Roxbury, because a lot of times, our community has a history of people making promises and not fulfilling those promises, the double cross, right? And so, these recent documentaries and podcasts, the Charles Stewart documentary on Max, the Big Dick podcast, the celebrating and commemorating rather the 50th anniversary of desegregation, right? Of busing, forced busing in 1974, Judge Garrity. Like, these ghosts that live in the machine are only, there's more stories than these, but they are reminders of the double cross that our community has gotten. So we have committed to build a center in Roxbury, and so that is our next project. So Parcel 3, which is the last urban renewal parcel in Boston. So you think about in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and up into the 70s, where large swaths of land were taken mostly in Black and immigrant and working class communities across the country to build highways. That also existed in Boston. And so this 7-acre parcel of land was part of this plan to put a highway through the middle of the Southwest Corridor, which is the part of the city where most of the people of color, the working class, the immigrant, the Black folks lived. And it was the first time that organizers from Cambridge to Roxbury stopped a federal transportation project to build a local light rail. And so the new Orange Line, as we call it, or the Orange Line, is in the place of where, unfortunately, houses and neighborhoods and people used to live. And this last 7.8-acre parcel of land still exists. And so we are a part of a team that's building some affordable home ownership property there, some residential places, two work towers, and a museum public space. And so we're in the process of building that. Hopefully it'll be online by 2028.
Okay. We're looking forward to that. Listen, thank you so much. I know you're a busy man doing busy man stuff. I appreciate you coming by and hanging out for a little while to talk. I think we definitely have to have you back on the show. And, we're going to have you back when we're doing one of our roundtable discussions where we're talking about culture, because people don't know that side of you and your, the parts of you that is not in the suit, unsuited to the market. Actually, no, we don't want, we don't want unsuited to the market. Keep the suit on, just please. Anyway, listen, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the Good Trouble Podcast. My name is Greg Ball, and we will see you soon. Make sure you stay in some good trouble.